Ladies and gentlemen, kicking off the first stop on his world tour, our new president and prophet, Russell M. Nelson! You say you want some revelation, well, here you go. It's gonna blow your freaking mind.
Signature Books, they have stopped sponsoring this podcast.
Yeah, this is kind of a sad day for us. Let's see what all happened, and then we'll let our Patreon listeners decide what they think.
That sounds like a really good plan. It's very unfortunate how it all ended, and they've ended the sponsorship of this podcast. But luckily, last time I checked Signature Books, they're not a hallowed hand, right, Al?
No, exactly.
So first of all, I would like to say that I'm very conflicted about Signature Books' former sponsorship of the Mormon News Roundup. They really took a gamble on us when we only had like 1 or 2 episodes under our belt, and for that I'm very grateful. But there were minor issues and poor oversight every step of the way, and the manner in which it ended is really unfortunate, isn't it?
It is. I guess it was nice to have a partner for a while while we were going. Yeah.
I just want to make sure that I am very clear about this. We were never paid properly for the first 8 months of the Mormon News Roundup. Signature Book, they paid us using PayPal. And there's 2 ways to pay in PayPal. One is with business and government goods and services. And if you do that, then PayPal takes money out of it before it gets to the other person because it's a business transaction. The other way to pay somebody is through friends and family. When you pay with friends and family, they don't take anything out because it's just money to money. Well, Signature Books paid us for our podcast under the business thing. So that meant that PayPal took money out every single time. So they did not pay us the amount that they said that they were going to pay because they paid us using business instead of friends and family. So yeah, they shorted us every single month. We didn't get paid at all for the last 4 months, even though we never missed an episode in over a year, right?
That's right. The amount of money that we're talking about was really it wasn't a large amount. This wasn't even enough to, say, make a car payment on, not even enough to really buy groceries for a month. Yeah.
It's very small. I don't care about the pay. I just care about the process. So the thing about it is that you know me pretty well. How often do I get annoyed with, with people who come on with bad comments on YouTube? Do you ever see me get worked up over something, really?
Let's see. I've known you for a year now. And I can probably count on one hand the number of times where you have really gone off air, and a lot fewer on air.
Yeah, that's true. See, the thing about it is that the emails to the Signature Books personnel regarding the pay and other routine matters, they were never really returned. I set up a calendar reminder the first of every month, send them an email, say, hey, can you please pay me? And they eventually I just stopped sending those because I felt like I was being rude because I would keep sending them emails and then nothing would happen. And I'm like, well, I don't want to be rude about it. I mean, it's only a few dollars. I guess I just let it go.
Yeah, exactly.
So Signature Books, they're asking people, or at least us, to work for them, and they don't pay. That is an absolute fact. And by the way, they fired us and ended the sponsorship with an email. Shows some leadership,
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah, this was, I've had breakups that went better than that.
Exactly. I mean, and also the timing on this is really, really bad because the sponsorship and email came only 4 days after we had our formal sit-down review of this podcast and its content. And we passed that review with flying colors. Never fear. I have no plans to stop this podcast because Devery, no unhallowed hand can stop this podcast from progressing. Do you feel like your investment with this podcast is worth it? What is your honest opinion? Is the return on investment, is it worth it? 100,000 views, is that cutting the mustard? What do you think?
Yes, I think with the amount of exposure you give us between social media and the podcast itself, I think so. Yeah, I'm pretty impressed by all of that.
And we released that 20-minute review as part of episode 54. Okay,
That's right.
So, I mean, it's 4 days later.
Yeah, Devery, our representative from Signature, he's come on a couple of times, and we've had a great time with him on the podcast, and I thought things were going very well.
Especially
obviously he thought he did too.
Yeah, he said that's what he said. He's the marketing manager. I asked him on the podcast episode multiple times, are we fulfilling Signature Books' vision? He said yes. I asked him if the podcast was worth his investment. Again, he answered unequivocally yes. I asked him if we needed to change anything at all. And he literally said, you're hitting a home run. Let me just ask you a couple last questions and we'll conclude things, Devery. Why do you support this podcast? Why does Signature Books support a Mormon News Roundup podcast at all?
Well, I think you're doing a good thing. I think for a lot of people, getting this kind of news and in a context where it's not just, you're not just hearing about it, it's being discussed and analyzed, I think is a good thing. And I think I like to see these podcasts be successful, and so if we can contribute in any way, want to be able to do that if it helps. And plus, it gets the word out about us, and so when we can support it, we know that there's a very good chance it'll increase our readership and increase our book sales. That's kind of the bottom line and the reason why anybody sponsors something like this to get the word out about them.
And then after publishing the episode with him on there, we didn't release any additional content, and yet he terminated the sponsorship 4 days later. What changed? Why publicly say that everything is super duper to our tens of thousands of people who will eventually listen to this, and then end things a few days later? I don't understand.
That's what I'd like to know as well. Do you have an answer to that?
Sort of. Is this just bad business? Is it incompetence? Is it both? I don't know. Now, I have an email here from Signature Books manager Devery Anderson here. Can you read a little bit of that email here?
I am writing because Signature Books is ending its sponsorship of Mormon News Roundup effective immediately. I understood that our marketing and financial discussion during our recent interview was a private discussion between the two of us and was not meant to be shared publicly. In that discussion, we discussed finances, money you felt we owed, and your pitch for further collaboration, which was inappropriate to share publicly.
And you paid us 8 months so far. You paid us about $400. I assume you're going to pay for the other $200. By the way, I'm certain we'll get caught up.
You mentioned that the podcast portion of our meeting would be in 3 parts. 1, report on the state of this podcast. 2, highlighting Signature Books' latest offerings. 3, discussion of general conference reactions and latest Mormon news. The slate of the podcast, quote unquote, or the state of the podcast, quote unquote, I assumed would be limited to disclosures about your demographics and progress over the past year. We ask that you remove this episode immediately.
What is your reaction, Al?
So he came on the podcast and didn't know he was being on the podcast? Was he not paying attention?
He was on a podcast and he didn't even know it.
I guess so.
He's on a podcast against his will.
Yeah, for heaven's sakes, man. I mean, pay attention.
Okay, so listen, pro tip number 1, don't assume anything. I gave Devery the complete episode show notes and slides that are along with that episode for their discussion several days in advance. If there was something that he was uncomfortable discussing during a recorded podcast, not a private conversation, it's a podcast, not a telephone call, he could have let it be known at any time prior or during the podcast itself. There was no surprises. There was no uncharted waters. He had days to ponder what it is that we were discussing. You know that little red flashing recorder button that's on the top corner of your screen when you're in the middle of a recording?
I can confirm that it's up there right now. It says live and then how many minutes we've been recording.
Yeah, It's not a secret recording or some kind of an ambush. Now, apparently he didn't review the slides or the articles or videos before we started recording. Yeah. I'm sorry to say that I'm not surprised. Now, a couple of other things before I get your reaction. Pro tip number 2, do your homework before you agree to co-host a podcast episode. I find it ironic that Signature Books ends up criticizing us for not being scholarly enough, which is what I'm going to show you in a minute. When Devery, he didn't review the show notes. He didn't review the clips. He didn't review the slides. He didn't do his job. What's good for the goose is not good for the gander.
Furthermore, it also says down here at the bottom of my screen, which, I'm not hosting the show right now. Dives is. And so as a guest here in that spot, I'm sitting in the exact same spot, seeing the exact same screen that Devery would see. It says down on the bottom here, you're in the show. Everyone can see and hear you. That's how StreamYard works, okay? I mean, I just thought I needed to add that to it. Like, there's no secret here. In addition to the fact that I had to go through, I think, 3 different screens in order to get to this one that told me, okay, you're entering the recording studio.
Yeah, I didn't hack his webcam. Here's another portion of this email as well. Can you read the second portion here?
Secondly, I was led to believe early on that you planned to continue a podcast mirroring what Brant Malone and Brian Whitney did with theirs. But when Barbara and I listened to my episode, we were taken aback by the silly play on the Beatles song Revolution and its mocking tone of Russell M. Nelson.
What do you think, Al?
Okay, so mocking, lampooning, sure. I don't think it's really a mocking. And furthermore, if you don't like the music, we could talk about changing the music. We could go with something else that Weird Alma has brought out, but Weird Alma, that's what he does. He makes Weird Al style for LDS culture.
He says that he was led to believe. The implication behind that is that somehow we misled him. That somehow we said we were going to do one thing and we actually delivered something else. That is fundamentally untrue. The only one who's broken promises in this relationship is Signature Books. He's talking about the Mormon News Report, which is now defunct. I never said we were going to clone them.
No. What we talked about doing is what we've been doing, is talking about news issues pertaining to Mormonism.
We've been using that Beatles parody song for, 50 episodes. We literally used it during the introduction of both of the episodes that Devery co-hosted. He listened to the music play in his headphones and said nothing. What changed?
Ladies and gentlemen, kicking off the first stop on his world tour, our new president and prophet, Russell M. Nelson. You say you want some revelation. Well, here you go. It's gonna blow your freaking mind.
That's a good question, because let's see, you weren't even present for the first one. You were off somewhere when we had Devery on the first time, and it was just me and him. And I went through the whole introduction process. I showed him how it worked when we were using Zencaster. I actually played the music live over the headphones, so we were listening to the intro music. I would start the introduction of, welcome brothers and sisters to the Mormon News Roundup. He may have a faulty memory. We're being accused of some things that I guess there was a misunderstanding of what they were expecting versus what we were intending to do. I think that our show has a lot more entertaining value in it as well as information.
Yeah, I mean, if you actually look at the lyrics, it says, this revelation is going to blow your freaking mind, and we're going to introduce you to our new president and prophet, Russell M. Nelson. It doesn't say that President Nelson is I don't know, that sacrifices goats on the top of Ensign Peak, or sometimes he's a deluded freak or something like that. It says our new president and prophet, Russell M. Nelson, is going on a world tour, which he did, by the way, back in 2019 when he very first took over, and that he's going to bring revelations that are going to blow your freaking mind. Yeah. I'm sorry, what's the problem there? I don't understand.
That's what they have been talking about ever since he took over. His whole thing is, big things are coming down the line. Keep watching for things that are going to be coming. He just said after last October conference, keep a watch out because very big things are coming in the months ahead.
It's just a parody song.
Which is what he says.
Yeah. Stop being so sensitive. It's just a parody. The Sunstone Mormon History podcast, it also starts with a parody song about Brigham Young and blood atonement. We're in good company here. It's eye-catching, and it's a little bit silly. Grow up a little bit. And the thing about it, Al, is we also use a parody song to close out the podcast with the Rolling Stones.
Yes,
and apparently no problem with the Rolling Stones. So let me just write this down.
I guess I didn't get that far.
Well, I don't know. Let me write this down. Rolling Stone parodies, no problem. Beatles parodies, that's bad. Okay, I guess I'm learning.
And the Rolling Stone parody is the Sympathy for Satan song from the Rolling Stones, where he talks about, there's the greatest victory that I could have is for people to use a nickname.
It's just entertainment. You know what I mean? God forbid that something's entertainment. What are we supposed to do? Change the opening song to God Be With You Till We Meet Again and close with all 7 verses of a poor way-bearing man of grief?
Either that or with the opening prayer and a closing prayer, I guess.
I guess so.
In listening to other episodes as well, we found that this is the introduction of many, if not all, of your episodes, and that there was mocking of LDS culture, BYU, the Deseret News, Mormon women, and more. Simply put, this is not Signature Books brand, nor something we want our company name associated with. Signature Books addresses issues within Mormonism using a scholarly, thoughtful approach. We simply cannot have listeners think we sponsor or condone the derogatory discussions and tone found in some of your episodes.
What do you think, Al?
That's a fair thing to say, which you could have mentioned a year ago. That's my thoughts.
When did we mock women? I'm sorry, when did we mock BYU? I don't remember really mocking anyone for anything. I mean, sure, we've had some critical opinions. I don't remember outright mocking someone, especially women.
Yeah, I'll tell you something. It's under the umbrella of we don't take anything too seriously. We have a Mormon joke of the week at the beginning of every episode. Obviously, that wasn't a problem for him to have a Mormon joke of the week, and that's okay. But that's kind of the theme of our whole episode is it's okay to not take things too seriously.
I guess we never mocked Mormon men, though. I mean, I guess if we did, that Signature Books doesn't have a problem with it.
Yeah.
I don't know. Hard to say. And this is the big thing. We mocked the Deseret News. A part of me wishes that we had, Al. I never made a covenant not to mock the Deseret News. Did you?
No, but the Deseret News, there's no secret that's the lapdog for the church. I mean, that's under the umbrella of Bonneville Communications. It is the church's newspaper.
Yeah, I never knew how sacred the Deseret News was to Signature Books until this moment, Al.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just had no idea. And this is what we get from the email. There's no specific cited. There's not one particular episode, not one particular moment, just some vague generalities. So we've had hundreds of hours of content, and not one word was referenced with a specific problem, not one supposedly derogatory discussion. The only thing specific that we got was a slightly silly parody song, and then a bunch of generalities. You couldn't come up with one specific thing.
Yeah. And furthermore, they're not listening to the podcast that they're sponsoring. That's a question that I have.
That's a very good question. They said that we weren't being scholarly enough. The thing about it, Al, is that, a lot of contemporary Mormon news is fundamentally immune from a scholarly analysis. Tell me how one brings a scholarly approach to Taylor or Frankie Paul or to armpit sex at BYU. This is pop culture, not Victorian Mountain Meadows diaries, Barbara.
We don't really have the time to do a deep dive on them. With contemporary news and current events, it's kind of rapid fire. It comes real quickly, and you don't have enough time to really do a lot of deep research into it.
Yeah, I mean, the tagline of the show is Ruminations on the Great and Spacious Beehive. This isn't your grandma's church news. It's pop LDS culture. If you want sanctimonious reverence in a sterile echo chamber, this isn't the podcast for you. And really, I thought Signature Books, out of all Mormon publishing houses, would appreciate that.
It really seemed to be, especially the first book that we did about Susie Young. She was one who went against the grain. I mean, the one daughter of Brigham Young that was outspoken, became involved in politics, started up all kinds of different clubs for women, very much a feminist. And yet they are going to publish a book about her, but they're not going to appreciate a podcast that doesn't take every aspect of LDS history completely seriously.
Can you read this next section here from their email?
We ask that you please take down any references to Signature Books as a sponsor of Mormon News Roundup on your website, on your podcast show notes, or anywhere else we are listed, and that neither Signature nor our book titles be mentioned in any context that would imply that we remain sponsors.
Okay, any reaction, Al?
Well, that's a lot of work for nothing.
It sure is. That's the thing. I sat down to start that editing process last Sunday, which is when we received the notice. And I didn't realize how much work it would be. The Mormon News Roundup, we're on CastBox, Facebook, Twitter, Mormon News Roundup, our own website, Apple Podcasts, Anchor, Spotify, and many more. We're absolutely everywhere. It's going to take tons of time, perhaps even dozens of hours to scrub all of these references and ads out. And by the way, some of that editing is going to result in demonetization. We're going to lose all the likes, all the comments, all the stuff. It's
all the views. Yep.
All the views. And take note of this also, Al. Signature Books is once again demanding that this all takes place immediately. And of course, for free. And that almost goes without saying. You know, I'm done doing free labor for Signature Books, Al. It's not about the money. It's just about the principle.
It's kind of cheeky to take a year to get around to saying this when this is something that could have been on episode 1. We had a few episodes out there before approaching Signature Books and taking them signing on as a sponsor. They could have done some due diligence up front. They didn't. They could have listened to the podcast, any episode from a year ago to now, and they could have made that decision, and we could have complied. But to say, well, now that we don't like you anymore, we are demanding that you go through a whole bunch of really intense labor of, tens of hours, if not hundreds of hours that it's going to take to get all this thing scrubbed. And we want it done right away. For
something we never paid you for in the first place.
Yeah, that's right. So,
and after we gave you a complete bill of health just a few days prior.
Yeah.
I just have an issue with that. I don't really have an issue with the money. It's evident to me that Signature Books makes promises and then doesn't deliver. If that's the way you want to run your business, I get that. It's not about the money. It's about the principle.
Which email are we going to decide that we read, and which email are we going to decide we didn't read? Because that kind of goes both ways. Signature Books is all the emails that we sent with invoices saying, hey, you're a month behind, you're 2 months behind, you're getting behind on your payments to us. Those you didn't read. Why should we be reading the emails that you're sending in return? We ask that you honor this request immediately. Please provide me with an invoice for money we still owe you through this month, with the understanding that it is our final payment and that our sponsorship is immediately ended.
Do some basic bookkeeping. Don't take my word for it. You run a business.
Yeah.
Figure out how much that you paid, how much that you promised, and then make make things right.
Is this how they pay out the royalties to their authors?
Because there's apparently a tier at Signature Books, because they would never do this to Michael Quinn.
Of course not.
No. And apparently we're on the lowest tier, which is where we should be, honestly. Yes,
sure,
we should be at the lowest tier, but we should still be dealt with respect.
Yeah.
Or just go back to the episode with Devery Anderson. I literally told him in the episode how much was outstanding. And I sent those slides to him prior to the podcast. It says, here's how much you paid, and here's your outstanding bill. It's in the slides. If he had a problem with it, he should have reviewed it ahead of time and said, you know what, I'm not comfortable with discussing this on the podcast, so don't bring it up. Run your bookstore like a business instead of a ward bake sale. Oops, sorry. We're not allowed to mock bake sales. I forgot about that, Al.
I think we're not allowed to even have bake sales anymore, since that's keeping money on the ward level instead of sending it to Salt Lake, right?
Yeah. No, listen, I run a small business. I pay my employees for their labor each and every time. No one needs to follow up with me about getting paid, period. And if I was conducting a formal performance review with one of my employees, and that person, she said to me that she's consistently shortchanged, I would stop everything right there. We're going to stop. Let's get to the bottom of this. I would apologize. I would fix it. But when I was talking to Devery in the episode about it and said, you still have outstanding bills, you haven't really paid us properly for the entire time. He just sat there. He wasn't affected. He didn't say, oh, this is an outrage. He didn't apologize. And that's what I expected, because that's what I've come to expect from them.
A whole lot of nothing.
Devery, he just doesn't care. He never will. He probably never will. Now, and the question is, should we air this in public? This is a Patreon only right now. Should we air this in a wider community?
Well, we gotta recoup our costs somehow, so that's why it's on Patreon. But
it seems very unsavory. See, the thing about it is that publicly, Signature Books just gave us a glowing endorsement, and now only putting the response up behind a paywall So it's like
Yeah.
people won't know the difference. That's why I don't know if we should release it to a wide audience.
That's a good point, because on the one hand, it does look kind of fishy to have it hidden behind a paywall, but at the same time, we're not necessarily out there to splatter paint all over Signature Books building or anything. We don't have a lot of bad blood there. We won't be doing business with them in the future, but that's just from learning the lesson about the kind of business that they do.
I really doubt, Al, that Devery is behind the cancellation because I just don't think that he cares. He's been on the podcast. He didn't care. He prefers touring around hawking his expensive books to mostly poor Black folks, trying to rub shoulders with C-list civil rights activists, all wrapped up in a white Mormon savirist complex. Devery fundamentally did not do his job as my boss at Signature Books, and he's absolutely incompetent as a manager. He might be a good author. I don't really know. Everything that I said about him is true. Barbara Jones is the head of Signature Books. She's more likely the impetus of the cancellation. It appears that you're the director of a small publishing company that publishes only 6, maybe 10 books at most. You're not running IBM here. This is a small publishing house with only a few employees. And it appears that she never listened to one episode of this podcast for an entire year.
This isn't even like Penguin Books. Signature Books is real small.
Yeah,
So-
you're supposed to be the director of a small influential publishing company. Act like it. Do some basic oversight. Listen to the podcast episodes that you sponsor. Provide a vision. Follow up. Don't send your marketing manager out to tell the world that you love and support your sponsored podcast, only to change your mind 4 days later, especially when nothing has changed.
I guess maybe she just got curious about, well, what is this news podcast that we're sponsoring? And then finally gave it a listen after Devery mentioned it to her.
If you failed to properly monitor your marketing team and the messaging, then apologize. Do your best to make things right. Pro tip, pay your employees and contractors on time, every time, period. This is speaking to Barbara. I don't know if she'll ever listen to this, but if you ever want to go in a different direction in your company or with someone or something, pick up the phone, have a conversation with your folks. Do your job. Oh, sorry. Was that mocking women? I got to be careful here.
No, you're not saying that all women don't do their jobs, but a pretty strong criticism of Barbara.
Okay, so Barbara did send me an email just before this podcast. I just want to review a little bit of it. She said that she doesn't really understand how the pay was messed up. That's hardly comforting. She doesn't understand the difference between PayPal, friends and family, and PayPal business. Okay, if you're running a business, if you're using PayPal, if you're trying to pay employees, understand your own payroll. She still doesn't understand it to this day. If I tell my employees that I'm going to pay them X dollars an hour or something for a job, and I don't even understand how the payment works, that's not good business. I don't understand. Now, she finally said that she wouldn't require us to go back and scrub out all the old episodes. She just said the ones going forward, which is a much more reasonable position. And she also said that we didn't have to take down the Devery Anderson episode again because he agreed to come on. So we've had a little bit of, I guess they've realized the amount of effort that is required with this. I'm not going to send them any more emails about any of this. I don't care about the couple $100 that they shorted us on. They only paid us for about half of what our efforts were. I don't really care about it. I'm tired of sending emails to Signature Books and have them say, well, we don't understand the pay stuff. Well, then don't be in a business where you have to pay people. Be authors.
And that's when they respond to your emails at all, indicating that they've read them.
Right. The Signature Books is run by a bunch of egg-headed authors. I understand that. I can appreciate that. These are not business people. So if you want to write books, write books. If you want to run a business and pay employees, then run a business and pay employees.
I'm sad that Signature Books chose to go the route that they chose to go, but at the same time, I'm not that sad. I mean, my pocket's still empty from a lot of things that they promised to pay us in the past. So I'm okay just putting my coat on and heading out the door.
Thanks, Al.
Yeah.
When it comes to nicknames of the church, such as LDS Church, the Mormon Church, to remove the Lord's name from the Lord's church is a major victory for Satan.
Satan.